Welcome to the Push for Excellence education segment. We have two standing educators, Dr. Von Mansfield, superintendent of school district in the south suburbs, Homewood Flossmoor School District. They've been doing some amazing things at Homewood Flossmoor. And so we're going to hear what it means to be responding to COVID in a high school district. And then we have, you remember her, she's on almost all the time. She's our educational consultant to Push for Excellence. She really directs all of our education town halls and hosts them and has been bringing constant information. So we're going to let her rest today. So I know we should open up with you, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Sonia Whitaker. What do you see? What things have you had? What adjustments have you and your team and your school district have had to make in light of this COVID and its impact on education?
I'll start off by saying the adjustments that we've had to make really centered around what we've learned about the resiliency level of our students and their parents. They wanted to have the resources that they needed in order to continue learning, but they didn't always have. And so the question then became immediately last March when we learned that students coming to the actual building was not even going to be an option. You know, today it's an option, but at one point in the state of Illinois, that was not an option. And so we had to make that adjustment again, based on one, what was mandated in terms of their attendance on the physical property, but two, based on what we knew about what our students and their parents needed. In our instance, we knew right away that far too many of our students did not have the technological resources that they needed. And so one of the ways that we adjusted is we did take the federal funds that were allocated to our school district, like many, and made wireless. We made Chromebooks and laptops available to every student in the district, as well as Wi-Fi hotspots for every family in the district. So within a matter of just a few weeks, we closed the digital divide so that we could again provide our students access to the content, to the curriculum, and supporting materials online in the home setting.
So were your teachers ready for remote learning, remote teaching?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, I don't know how else to answer that, because we hadn't done it before. There was no reason to have to do it before. They got ready very quickly. In fact, I have been amazed because in my position, I've actually gone in and observed, I'm sure Dr. Mansfield too, I've actually gone and observed teachers teaching during this pandemic crisis. And there are days when I wonder if they even know a pandemic crisis is going on. Wow. We've come a long way from last March, when we had to not only, that's a great question, Dr. Wilson, not only were we getting laptop computers and Chromebooks out to our students, but we actually did have to provide some of our staff members with the technological equipment that they needed to deliver the instruction in their own home setting. And so were we ready? No, not at first, but we got ready real quick.
And I know you're serving as deputy superintendent in the Dalton School
Correct.
District. She wears a lot of hats, but has been in this education arena and watched the changes occur over time. And Dr. Mansfield, who we've known for some time as well, now as superintendent of Homewood Flossmoor. What did you have to do? This is a year later, really. It's almost a year to the day that we're looking at school districts 1 year into COVID, and it's not over yet. What did you do?
Yeah. Well, I think Dr. Whitaker put it in the best way possible, in the sense that we learned along the way and we did what we needed to do to make it work. And as she mentioned, I was surprised at the digital divide, even in the suburban area, where you think kids.
Yeah, I thought y'all had all the money out there.
Well, we have some.
Y'all had a digital divide?
We had some. So in response to that whole notion, you have to find out who those people are. And we did get Chromebooks to them. We literally had to take our classroom sets of materials for the hardware and start passing that out, because some of those Chromebooks and devices were classroom sets, they're called, where just, they're in the classroom. So we start peeling that out because we start running into a supply issue from Dell and some of the other computer companies. They couldn't make them fast enough to get to the school districts. So from that regard, you had to be a little bit creative. So we indeed start taking some of the materials we had in the school setting and delving those out, especially since the students weren't in school. And again, to Dr. Whitaker's point, we had staff members who also needed hardware because they have children at home also. So there's usually one device.
We don't talk about that.
No.
The teachers have children that they got to have, even if they have a computer, because I know parents are watching what they need a computer for, because they have children also.
Absolutely. And also they work, and also their spouse may work. So all of a sudden they've got to have 3 devices in the house, where normally one probably when people taking their turns. The other thing that we discovered with some of our students is they literally had to go on shifts also, because at times where one student took 2 hours to do their homework from 6 to 8, then their brother or sister or, family member jumped on and did their homework from 8 to 10. So, even with one device in the house, it just wasn't enough at times, and we too had to provide Wi-Fi opportunities to people and also to our kids, because it was just not existent to the degree that made it fair and equitable for everyone. So to your point, Dr. Wilson, I would say we have resources and we ran into that. I can only imagine those school districts that did not have the resources and how much more disadvantaged those students and families were without access to what was needed.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it. Dr. Whitaker, you really know this. If I have 4 children, I work at one of these big box stores. I don't have any benefits. I can't work remotely. I leave them somewhere at home with the Wi-Fi. How do you make sure that these students are even online? Because that I know how they used to skip school, but how do you skip school remotely? How do you make sure they don't? And I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Mansfield, because how do they cut class as high school students? But the little kids, I get tired after an hour. What do y'all do? Y'all got 6 hours of school, right?
Yes.
Remotely.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, how do we determine if students are online? With our English, language arts, and mathematics programming option, because it is a computer-based curriculum, we're actually able to see when they logged on and when they logged off. And so you want to talk about what's happened since from March to March is during a period that we doing things at the leadership level we've never had to do before. At first, when students left and we gave them computers, it wasn't at the top of our brains. How would we, I'll say analytically, monitor whether or not students were engaged? And so as we began to look at the curriculums, that's when we began to learn more about what information that we could get about student engagement level. So for our administrators team, we actually started our April meeting, students out in March. In April, the first thing that we did was we pulled up those numbers. That means senior level leadership. We actually showed the administrators, we went school by school. In the area of mathematics, 80% of your students are logging on 80% of the time. Another school. In the area of mathematics, 60% of your students are logging on 60% of the time. I will tell you, my administrators are like, whoa, at your level, you have access to all of that information. Absolutely. As time has gone on, so not only do you have to have the data, but you have to then put it in front of the leaders to then put it in front of the teachers. As a direct result of that, now we're out a year later, and my administrators and my teachers are now also monitoring that data. In addition to, again, checking the box, yes, student signed in, but teachers aren't teaching. They're not teaching face to face like we're talking like right now for 6 hours. there are times when they have to release the students to go and do work. And so that's when it also became important to have access to that hard data that says, what did they do when they got off the Zoom with us? So that has been one way that we've been able to ensure engagement as much as we can manage by monitoring it.
So if you give me an assignment, you teach the class for X number of minutes, and then you tell me to do something, and then I have to log back
into the math program or the English language arts program to do the work, which is where we can capture the minutes online and minutes.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that something? Never knew that before.
It's a lot, especially for little kids
that
are moving around. I mean, I don't know what I would have done. You let me off and then tell me to get back on, and I don't have an adult in the house. I don't know.
And there are some instances where there's families where the grandmother is keeping all the grandkids. So she went from just maybe one set of small grandkids to 10, maybe 12 kids with 12 laptops or 12 Chromebooks.
And she doesn't know how to, and grandmama doesn't know how to use any of them.
And now with just a few rooms, and now all the different teachers are teaching different grade levels.
How do you deal with the changing classes? I'm a senior or a junior. I'm doing 5 different classes. How do I do that remotely?
Well, actually, those kind of logistics, Reverend Wilson, are easy because you just click on the link for that class. So there is no movement. In fact, we said there's no reason for y'all to be tardy now because you don't have to walk between classes. All you got to do is click a button.
Yeah, but I'm tired from the last button I clicked.
Well, and you know what? As Dr. Whitaker said, that is the challenge when you have maybe a parent trying to supervise and you just get burned out looking at a screen all day. So we did try to build in some time for kids to kind of get a break, just as if they were passing between classes. So we did leave the passing time as if you were passing so that you could, make a pit stop or go get some water or just get a break. I think it's really interesting in the high school setting, at least, you have to think of these new terms called synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. And I guess the technical word for what Dr. Whitaker was talking about was the asynchronous, which means basically the kids are online doing a lesson without the teacher. They're just going through the software program or maybe a lesson the teacher put up there, and they're doing that on their own. And in the high school setting, and some of the other elementary and middle schools, they do synchronous where the teachers are actually online. So you'll often hear people talk about synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. And those are very important terms. But at the high school level, we had to go one extra step because sometimes the high school kids would get into things they shouldn't. So that's why it was also important for us to get Chromebooks to them, because we had control over where they would go on the websites through software.
Oh,
so
wow.
if you don't issue your own technology, then kids are at risk to some degree, and not by anything intentional, sometimes unintentional. Sometimes you do have people out there who aren't looking to do good things. Find those openings in those computer programs or the lesson that you do have to safeguard.
This is amazing. I know parents don't know this stuff. We don't know this. Now, the final question I have before we leave is, how are you going to measure progress? What's the plan? Dr. Whitaker? How you going to test me? You can't even keep me online.
Right. Well, we have been able to do just that. We've been able to assess our students. We did, like we did in the past, we have issued our students a beginning of the year and the middle of the year assessment. And we
is it virtual?
Well, here's where it got tricky. Even though our students are remote, our students are actually still following the remote model. And we'll be following it throughout the remainder of the school year. But we actually was able to get our students to come in at the beginning of the year to take our district's beginning of the year assessment. And we had over a 90% attendance rate. So they came. Well, then the winter came and parents were very reluctant to bring them back. And so what's interesting is we got their fall data. where they took the assessment on the property. They took the assessment in the winter, but that was off the property. We saw some gains, but the gains in reading and math were not statistically significant. Across the district, I would say their performance level, as is indicated on this one assessment, was about the same. No significant growth, but they didn't fall back. What will be interesting is when we do our district assessment in the spring, which probably might lead us into a quick conversation about the state assessment as required by the federal government. It will be interesting to see how our students fared when we compare the spring, the end of the year assessment, district assessment, to how they did in the fall. And our classroom teachers are still issuing classroom assessments that they are indeed grading. They're doing it online. And so that is what's happening in our organization. And also we had a district leadership team meeting around the winter holiday, where we had every single principal present to the community during a public meeting the data on how their students were performing in English and language arts and math when they compared the fall assessment to the winter assessment. So not only did we assess them, but we told the community what we learned about our students during that time frame and what we were going to do with what we learned about their strengths and weaknesses for the second half of the year to address them.
So you've had some community conversations. Well, what are you doing in the high school to measure progress?
Well, Reverend Wilson, it's going to be a little bit more of an asterisk, because just to your point, those kids weren't here. And when we say not here, when you're trying to give a test, you want to make sure everybody has access to the same thing. You want some kids, if you're going to have an open book test, just make it open book and let the kids use their resources to take their assessment. So we've really done something a little different with grades, as far as just making sure kids have a chance to go back and review and redo. So it's not like the traditional, sit for an hour, take the test, and that's your assessment, because we weren't able to really keep all the pieces the same in terms of making it fair, making sure the kids were doing their own work. So at that point, you just open it up in like an open book test and just look at the product or the authentic experience that the kids are having, and they're able to share that with you. So the old traditional way of taking tests is changed just a little bit to meet that. But to Dr. Whitaker's point, we're still responsible by the state to take their assessments. So we are asking those groups of students to come in. We still have to take what's called the SAT test, which is a standardized test that most colleges look for. We don't have to take the practice SAT test this year. The state did waive that, but we still have some state tests where we're bringing in all the kids in that class for that test in person. They don't get a chance to be hybrid. They all have to come in.
That's going to be an issue, I think. And one of the challenges for both of you, as you look at these tests, how do you teach science? I heard Dr. Whitaker, you say teaching language and math, but are you teaching science and geography? The things that I remember that are on the test, especially for high school, you have to have some mastery of science and language if you're in high school. This is hard. We need to protest.
Well,
no, what do you want parents to do? We need to do something. I can imagine my child trying to be tested. First of all, I'm still with the Chrome. I'm trying to get the Chromebook and that working with 5 or 6 children of different grades. How are you going to test my child? Mm-hmm. And then if you tell me that they're doing poorly, I'm not understanding.
Yeah. Well, and it's important to recognize that the U.S. Department of Education, released to us a formal statement requiring that our students take the state exam. There's been a number of different memos issued to school districts, and I'll tell you briefly what the latest one was. But before I share that, I'll say that initially at the state board level, the state superintendent for our district, for our state, like many states in our country, issued a waiver request to the U.S. Department of Education with the expectation or the hope that we would be waived from having to issue the standardized test because of the amount of time it takes away from instruction, and the obvious, which is students have not been on the property. So that waiver essentially was rejected. And we received notice just a few weeks ago from the U.S. Department of Education that we did indeed have to issue the state exam. And we were given a window, which initially ended sometime later this spring, by which the students had to be tested. Now, there was some caveats in the letter that was issued to us by the new Secretary of Education, which said things like student performance, using my words, will not be held against you. Using my words, the results of student performance are not going to be calculated negatively toward a school district, as is indicated on your school district report card, as it had been done in the past. But that at the federal level, they wanted to get a handle on what students knew and were able to do. Long and short of it is, just recently we received notice, almost a matter of days ago, that we again still do have to issue our state exams. However, we could now consider the fall as an option. So right here in the state of Illinois right now, I can't speak for other states, but right here in the state of Illinois, I am clear, and Dr. Mansfield, you could tell me if your understanding is different. We have the option, no option of whether or not to give these assessments, but we do have the option as of today to determine whether we're going to give the assessment this spring versus the fall. But I got to add that if we give it in the fall, we should note that for the first time in a long time, we would actually be given 2 state assessments next school year, because it normally happens once a year. But if we give it in September, we're still going to have to give it in March.
Yeah, and just the sequencing for us, we're going to go ahead and give it in the spring, because we have seniors who hopefully will be graduating and moving on to college or the workplace. And they're going to have that assessment prior to graduation, because that is part of the requirement for them to graduate. But as I said at the beginning, there's a big old asterisk here, because that information may not be comparable to data and outcomes from previous years, because the circumstances are just so different.
Right, right.
Well, I wish we're going to have to do more of this, Dr. Whitaker, because this is an issue that parents have to be concerned about, particularly parents of children in high school. And for those students that fall behind, I'd like to have a part 2 to this, where we talk about how students that test poorly for whatever reason, how are we going to make sure they catch up and get up to what is considered grade level? What should parents and community do in terms of communicating with the Secretary of Education at the federal level and the State Board of Education? This is something that we're in a pandemic, and you can't just follow these rules in a pandemic when everything has changed. So we need you to help us at Push Excel figure out what should our response be. And you know, Dr. Whitaker, this is the public policy for education in the 21st century. How do we respond to remote learning in the world of COVID? Y'all want to say some closing remarks as we close this discussion and look forward to another discussion? And you all should convene some other your counterparts. We need to really wrestle with this. Is a big issue.
It is.
I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Well, I think for us in closing, we're trying to slowly make our way back and do it as safely as we can. And we want to make sure parents are comfortable with that. We're starting to get into the vaccination phase. And I would say the majority of our teachers who want the vaccination have had an opportunity to at least get 1 shot and working on the second. So at some point, I'm hoping that makes its way down to the students as they, continue to improve the science and get to a point where they've got vaccinations for, adolescents and really young kids. So I think it's a slow go here, Reverend Wilson, but I am confident and hopeful that we're going to be back more in person by the start of next school year.
And we're gearing up right now. My head is really wrapped around the possible summer school option. We are actually going to host summer school, but again, because we're 100% remote, that's another hill to climb for us in terms of wanting to bring students back on the property, possibly following a hybrid model, which again is very different from what they've experienced for a year now. And so that's what we're wrestling with right now. Again, is climbing up this next hill to provide some opportunity to address any gaps in learning that have occurred during the period of COVID-19.
Well, I really thank you for this discussion. It's such a frank and open and informative discussion. that I know parents need and the community needs. You all got to think about how can we help you? Because we really want to help make sure that every child receives a high quality public education, even in COVID. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr. Whitaker. Thank you, Dr. Mansfield.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Mansfield.